The suspenseful arrival. The vastness of space seemed eerily quiet, but for the soldiers of the Galactic Council, it was the calm before the storm. The battlefield stretched across a war-torn sector, littered with the wreckage of countless ships. Explosions flashed like dying stars, and screams echoed through desperate comm channels. The enemy, an alien empire known as the Draxus Dominion, was merciless, dominating the Council forces with brutal efficiency. Inside the bridge of a badly damaged cruiser, Commander Varlas of the Zorian Alliance stared at the holographic map. Red markers, enemy ships, far outnumbered the few blue dots representing the remaining Galactic Council fleet. Despair hung heavy in the air. The Council's finest fleets had been crushed one by one, leaving them with only a small battered force. Victory seemed impossible. "Commander, we've lost contact with the eastern flank," a young officer shouted, his voice trembling. "The Draxus are closing in fast. We're outnumbered 10-1. Commander Varlas tightened his grip on the edge of the console. "Hold the line. Reinforcements are on the way," he said, though his voice carried little conviction. Everyone knew reinforcements would be too late, if they came at all. Just as he spoke, a new alarm blared across the bridge. The crew turned to the main display as a fresh signal appeared on the map. It wasn't Draxus. It wasn't Council either. It was unknown. A massive fleet was approaching from the outer edges of the battlefield. "What is that?" Varlas asked, his voice laced with confusion. The officer manning the sensors struggled to find an answer. "It's a human fleet," she said, disbelief evident in her tone. "Multiple ships, large signatures, bigger than anything we've seen before." The bridge fell silent. Humans. They were a minor power, barely acknowledged by the larger galactic players. Known for their primitive worlds and outdated technologies, humans weren't seen as a threat. Why would they show up in a war zone like this? But before anyone could voice their doubts, the view screen shifted. The fleet came into focus. Massive ships loomed in the distance, their sleek, ominous designs silhouetted against the glow of distant stars. They moved with purpose, their formation flawless. Each ship bristled with unknown weaponry, their hulls reflecting a cold, metallic sheen. "What are they doing here?" Varlas muttered, his gaze fixed on the screen. On the Draxus flagship, High Commander Keltrak watched the approaching fleet with amusement. "Humans? Is this some kind of joke?" he sneered. "They've sent primitives to fight us. This is an insult to our might." The Draxus officers chuckled, their confidence unshaken. They had crushed far stronger opponents than this. A small, weak species like humanity was no match for their advanced fleets. But as the human ships entered firing range, something strange happened. The usual pre-battle chaos was missing. The humans did not send out a barrage of fire, nor did they attempt to hail anyone. Instead, their ships spread out in a methodical formation, surrounding the Draxus forces with chilling precision. On the Galactic Council's side, the crew watched in stunned silence. "What are they waiting for?" someone whispered. The humans seemed calm, almost too calm. Suddenly, a transmission crackled across all frequencies. It was from the human flagship. A deep, steady voice echoed through the comms. "This is Admiral Grant of the Terran Federation. You have two options: surrender or be destroyed." The bluntness of the message left everyone stunned. Keltrak burst into laughter. "Surrender? To you? Primitive fools," he barked, slamming his fist on the console. "Destroy them all. Show no mercy." The Draxus fleet surged forward, their weapons lighting up the void. Hundreds of plasma torpedoes and laser beams streaked toward the human ships. For a moment, it seemed like the humans would be overwhelmed. But then, something incredible happened. The human ships unleashed a wave of energy that spread across the battlefield like a silent storm. Draxus torpedoes disintegrated mid-flight, their lasers fizzled out harmlessly. The battlefield lit up with a dazzling display of human technology at work. What is this?" Keltrak stammered, his confidence wavering for the first time. Back on the Council's side, Commander Varlas stared at the screen, wide-eyed. "They're not firing," he said in disbelief. "They're disabling the enemy's weapons." The Draxus fleet, now weaponless and exposed, was thrown into chaos. Their commanders barked orders, but it was futile. The humans hadn't fired a single shot, yet they had rendered the Draxus fleet defenseless. On the human flagship, Admiral Grant stood tall, his gaze unwavering. "They wanted a fight," he said to his crew. "Let's show them what humanity is capable of." The human fleet began to move, their ships cutting through Draxus formations with surgical precision. One by one, the Draxus ships were disabled, their engines and shields collapsing under the weight of humanity's overwhelming technological superiority. Commander Varlas could only watch in awe as the tide of the battle shifted. The once dominant Draxus fleet was now nothing more than helpless prey. The humans had arrived, and they weren't here to lose. The suspense of what would come next hung heavy over the battlefield. No one could predict the full extent of humanity's power, but one thing was clear: the galaxy would never see humans the same way again. The enemy's overconfidence. The battlefield was a graveyard of fire and wreckage. The Draxus Dominion, once an unstoppable juggernaut, was now facing something they had never encountered before: calm, calculated defiance. Yet on the Draxus flagship, High Commander Keltrak refused to acknowledge the severity of the situation. "Pathetic tricks," Keltrak sneered, watching the holographic display that showed his fleet's weapons rendered useless. "They got lucky. Overwhelmed them with numbers." Around him, his officers hesitated. The reports from their ships were alarming. Shields failing, systems unresponsive. Entire squadrons were immobilized without a single human shot fired. Yet fear of Keltrak's wrath kept them silent. "Deploy the swarm fleet," he barked. "Let's see how these apes handle chaos." A swarm of smaller, nimble Draxus ships launched from their carriers. Thousands of them filled the void like a tidal wave of black metal, each equipped with automated systems designed to overwhelm enemies through sheer quantity. They darted toward the human fleet, moving so fast they left contrails of light in their wake. On board the human flagship, Admiral Grant observed the swarm without a flicker of emotion. "They're trying to drown us in numbers," his tactical officer said, her voice calm but curious. "Should we engage?" Grant raised a hand. "Not yet." This pause baffled the Galactic Council forces watching from the sidelines. Commander Varlas, still on his battered cruiser, clenched his fists. "Why aren't they firing? They're just sitting there. They'll be overwhelmed." But humanity's confidence was not born of arrogance. It was born of preparation. Each human ship's AI systems tracked thousands of targets simultaneously, feeding the data to their centralized battle network. It wasn't a question of if the swarm could be stopped. It was a question of when. "Activate the net protocol," Grant ordered. The human ships unleashed something new. Hundreds of glowing, translucent projectiles launched into the swarm. They weren't weapons in the traditional sense. Instead, they were energy nodes that formed an interlinked web, trapping the swarm in a net of light. The Draxus swarm ships screeched to a halt, their automated systems unable to navigate the sudden maze. Ships collided, exploded, or became hopelessly tangled in the glowing web. It was chaos. But it wasn't the chaos Keltrak had hoped for. "What is this?" Keltrak bellowed as he slammed his clawed fist against the console. "They're not supposed to have technology like this." Across the Draxus fleet, panic began to set in. Officers screamed into their comms, demanding solutions, but none came. The humans were dismantling their forces without breaking a sweat. For the Galactic Council commanders watching, the display was surreal. Varlas leaned closer to the screen, his disbelief slowly turning into something else: hope. "They're not just fighting," he murmured. "They're controlling the battlefield." Meanwhile, aboard the Draxus flagship, Keltrak's bravado began to falter. His officers whispered among themselves, their voices tinged with fear. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was a lesson in precision, discipline, and power. One Draxus officer finally spoke up, her voice shaking. "High Commander, perhaps we should retreat." Keltrak turned on her with a snarl. "Retreat? To them? Never." He pointed at the holographic map, where the human ships were closing in. "This is a fluke. We'll crush them." But even as Keltrak clung to his arrogance, the battlefield told a different story. The human fleet moved with unnerving coordination. Every ship knew its role, every maneuver executed with clockwork precision. It wasn't just their technology, it was their strategy. They weren't reacting to the Draxus, they were dictating the terms of the battle. On the human flagship, Admiral Grant stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze steady. "They still don't understand," he said quietly, almost to himself. "They think this is about power. It's about purpose." With a subtle nod, Grant gave the next order. "Fire." For the first time, the human fleet unleashed its full might. Beams of concentrated energy lanced through the Draxus ships, cutting through their armor like paper. Explosions rippled across the battlefield as entire squadrons were annihilated in seconds. The human fleet's firepower was overwhelming, but it wasn't reckless. Every shot was deliberate, every target chosen with precision. The Galactic Council forces, watching in stunned silence, could hardly believe their eyes. "They're unstoppable," Varlas whispered. Keltrak, however, refused to accept defeat. "Redirect all power to the main cannon," he roared. "If we can destroy their flagship, the rest will fall." The Draxus flagship's main cannon began to charge, glowing with a menacing red light. It was their last, desperate gamble, a weapon powerful enough to destroy planets. On the human flagship, the tactical officer reported, "Their main cannon is powering up. They're aiming at us." Admiral Grant's response was calm, almost indifferent. "Let them try." The tension in the battlefield was palpable as the Draxus flagship fired. A massive beam of energy shot toward the human flagship, tearing through space with terrifying speed. But just as it seemed the humans might be in danger, their flagship activated a shield unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The beam struck the shield and dissipated instantly, as though it had never existed. Keltrak's face twisted in disbelief. "Impossible. That was our strongest weapon." Admiral Grant's voice echoed across the comms once more, calm and resolute. "Your strongest weapon means nothing to us. This is your last warning. Stand down." For the first time in his life, Keltrak hesitated. The humans weren't just winning. They were dismantling everything the Draxus believed about power and dominance. And for the first time, the High Commander felt a twinge of fear. Humanity's secret weapon. The Draxus forces were in disarray, their arrogance shattered by the precision and power of the human fleet. Across the war zone, alien commanders scrambled to understand what had gone wrong. Ships floated powerless, their systems fried by the humans' mysterious technology. For the first time, the Draxus Dominion, conquerors of countless worlds, faced an enemy they couldn't comprehend. On board the human flagship, Admiral Grant stood in the center of the command deck, his calm demeanor unshaken. Around him, his officers worked with quiet efficiency. No one celebrated their victories. This was no time for pride. Every move was calculated, every action purposeful. "Status update," Grant said, his voice steady. "Draxus fleet is down to 40% operational capacity," replied the tactical officer. "Their flagship's main cannon has been neutralized. They're attempting to regroup, but their coordination is failing." Grant nodded. "Good. Keep applying pressure. They'll break soon enough." Meanwhile, on the Draxus flagship, High Commander Keltrak was losing control. His once proud officers now shouted over each other, their fear boiling over into chaos. Reports flooded in. Engines offline. Weapons unresponsive. Communications jammed. The Draxus fleet was crumbling, and Keltrak knew it. "Silence," Keltrak roared, slamming his clawed hand on the console. The room fell quiet, but the tension was suffocating. We are the Draxis Dominion. We do not fall to primitives. But even as he spoke, his confidence wavered. The humans had unleashed something beyond his understanding. Their weapons were precise but unconventional, designed not just to destroy but to disable, to control. It was as though they had predicted every move the Draxis would make. Keltrak turned to his lead engineer. "What are they using against us? I want answers." The engineer hesitated, his scales glinting under the harsh light. It's not conventional technology, High Commander. Their weapons operate on principles we've never encountered before. It's as if they're reading our systems in real time and adapting. Keltrak snarled, but deep down, he felt a cold dread creeping into his chest. The Draxis Dominion had spent centuries perfecting their war machines. They had conquered advanced civilizations and crushed resistance across the galaxy. And yet, these humans, these so-called primitives, had rendered all of it useless. On the battlefield, the human fleet executed their next move. A wave of small, spherical drones was released from the Terran ships. They scattered across the Draxis formations, weaving through the chaos with uncanny precision. The drones emitted a low-frequency pulse, undetectable to the naked eye, but devastating to Draxis systems. Inside the Draxis ships, chaos erupted. Consoles sparked and exploded, lights flickered, and engines sputtered to a halt. The pulse wasn't just targeting their technology. It was dismantling their ships at the molecular level. What is this sorcery? Keltrak spat, his voice cracking with frustration. How are they doing this? The answer lay in humanity's secret weapon, the Quantum Battle Interface, QBI. Unlike any technology the galaxy had seen, the QBI was a revolutionary system that combined artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and real-time data analysis. It allowed human ships to adapt instantly, predicting enemy movements and exploiting weaknesses before they could react. While the galaxy had focused on raw firepower, humanity had invested in strategy and precision. On the Galactic Council's side, Commander Varlas watched in awe. The human fleet moved like a single entity, each ship anticipating the other's actions with perfect synchronization. "This isn't just technology," he said quietly. "It's something else." Back on the human flagship, Admiral Grant's voice broke through the comms. "Attention, Draxis fleet. Your systems have been compromised. Your weapons are useless. Surrender now, or we will proceed with your complete destruction." Keltrak's claws trembled as he listened to the transmission. The humans didn't sound angry or vengeful. They sounded calm, almost bored. It was the voice of someone who knew they had already won. But Keltrak was not ready to surrender. "Send the reserve fleet," he barked. "We still outnumber them. Overwhelm them with force." The reserve fleet, hidden in the shadow of a nearby moon, surged forward. Hundreds of fresh Draxis ships entered the battlefield, their weapons blazing. For a moment, it seemed like the tide might turn. But the humans had anticipated this move. "Deploy the hammer," Grant ordered. From the rear of the human formation, a single, massive ship emerged. Its hull was sleek and black, almost invisible against the void of space. This was the TFS Aegis, humanity's most advanced warship and the culmination of decades of innovation. Unlike the other ships in the fleet, the Aegis was not built for restraint. It was built for overwhelming force. The Draxis reserve fleet fired everything they had at the Aegis. Plasma torpedoes, railgun slugs, and energy beams lit up the void as they raced toward the massive ship. But the Aegis didn't flinch. Its shields absorbed the onslaught like ripples on a pond. Then it retaliated. The Aegis unleashed a single burst of energy, a beam so intense it turned the battlefield white for a split second. When the light faded, an entire quadrant of the Draxis fleet was gone, reduced to glowing debris. On the Draxis flagship, Keltrak stared at the screen in stunned silence. His fleet was gone. His weapons were useless. And now, Humanity's most powerful ship was bearing down on him. For the first time in his life, High Commander Keltrak felt powerless. In that moment, he realized something terrifying. Humanity wasn't just fighting to win. They were fighting to prove a point. And they had succeeded. The battle's turning point. The war zone was unrecognizable. Where once the Draxus fleet had stood as a symbol of galactic dominance, now only shattered debris and scattered survivors remained. The once proud Draxus forces, infamous for their brute strength and overwhelming numbers, were on the brink of collapse. And the humans had only just begun. On the Draxus flagship, High Commander Keltrak paced furiously, his clawed feet scraping the polished floor. His officers cowered, casting nervous glances at the holographic display. The battlefield was a sea of red markers, destroyed or disabled Draxus ships. The few remaining green markers, representing operational ships, flickered like dying embers. Status report. Keltrak snarled. One of his officers hesitated before speaking. High Commander, we've lost over 70% of our fleet. The human forces remain at near full strength. Keltrak's claws clenched, near full strength. How? They'd been hit, haven't they? Yes, but their ships are repairing themselves, the officer said, his voice trembling. Their systems seem adaptive. Damage we inflict is neutralized within moments. Keltrak slammed his fist against the console, his rage boiling over. This is impossible. They're primitives. They shouldn't even have this technology. But impossible or not, the reality was undeniable. The Draxus Dominion, the terror of the galaxy, was losing. On the human flagship, Admiral Grant observed the battlefield with calm precision. His officers worked silently, their movements as fluid and coordinated as the fleet they commanded. The command deck was a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding aboard the Draxus flagship. Tactical status, Grant asked. The tactical officer responded without hesitation. The Draxus fleet is fragmented. Their command structure is faltering. They've begun retreat maneuvers on the western flank, but we've cut off their escape route. Grant nodded. And the Aegis, fully operational. The next strike is ready on your command. For a brief moment, Grant said nothing. His gaze lingered on the holographic map, where the Draxus fleet's movements played out like a desperate game of chess. Then he gave a single measured order. Proceed. The TSS Aegis moved like a predator, slow and deliberate. Its sleek, black hull seemed to absorb the starlight, making it appear almost ghostly against the backdrop of space. On board, its weapons systems hummed with energy, preparing for the next strike. The Draxus forces, still clinging to the hope of escape, suddenly found themselves surrounded. Human ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, cutting off every possible exit. The Draxus commanders barked frantic orders, but it was no use. The humans had them cornered. Keltrak's eyes widened as he watched the Aegis charge its weapon again. They're hurting us. He realized, his voice filled with a mix of rage and fear. This isn't a battle. It's a slaughter. Desperation gripped the Draxus commanders. One by one, they began to break formation, abandoning their posts and fleeing into the void. Entire squadrons disbanded, their pilots choosing survival over loyalty. On the battlefield, the human fleet executed their next move with chilling precision. The Aegis fired its main weapon, a controlled energy pulse that spread like a ripple across the Draxus formations. It wasn't a destructive blast, but something far more insidious. Ships caught in the pulse lost power instantly, their engines and weapons going dark. The Draxus ships floated helplessly, like prey immobilized in a spider's web. Keltrak stared at the screen, his pride crumbling. What kind of war is this? He muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Back on the Galactic Council's side, Commander Varlas watched in stunned silence. The humans had not only turned the tide of the battle, they had redefined it. Their tactics were unlike anything the galaxy had seen, blending overwhelming force with strategic brilliance. This isn't war, Varlas said, almost to himself. This is surgical. They're not just defeating the Draxus, they're dismantling them piece by piece. The council officers around him nodded in agreement, their earlier despair replaced by awe. For the first time in decades, hope flickered among the council's ranks. On board the Draxus flagship, chaos erupted as the human fleet closed in. Keltrak's officers shouted over each other, their fear palpable. But Keltrak, consumed by his own pride, refused to accept defeat. "We are the Draxus Dominion," he roared. "We do not surrender." The flagship's weapon systems powered up for one final desperate attack. Keltrak's eyes burned with determination. If he was to fall, he would take as many humans with him as possible. But the humans were ready. As the Draxus flagship prepared to fire, a single human ship broke formation. It was smaller than the others, almost unassuming, but it moved with blinding speed. Before the Draxus flagship could react, the human ship launched a precise strike, disabling its weapon systems in an instant. Keltrak froze, his hands trembling as the lights on his console flickered and went dark. The human ship hovered before them, its weapons locked but silent. Then, a transmission came through. Admiral Grant's voice echoed across the comms, calm and unyielding. "Your weapons are gone. Your fleet is shattered. Surrender, or we will finish what you started." Keltrak stared at the screen, his pride battling against the cold reality before him. His fleet was defeated, his empire was exposed. And now, the decision was his to make. The fate of the Draxus Dominion hung in the balance. The enemy's desperation. High Commander Keltrak's clawed hands trembled as he gripped the edges of his console. The battlefield was a graveyard of Draxus ships, their hulking forms lifeless against the infinite void. The humans hadn't just won the fight. They had dominated it in ways that defied reason. Yet Keltrak wasn't ready to concede. Surrender was an insult that his pride, and the pride of his dominion, could not bear. "Send out the Vindicator," Keltrak growled through gritted teeth. His officers turned to him, wide-eyed. "High Commander, the Vindicator is incomplete. It hasn't been tested." "Do it," Keltrak roared, his voice cracking under the weight of desperation. "Humanity thinks it can humiliate us. Let's show them the Draxus are not so easily broken." The Vindicator was the Draxus Dominion's last gamble, a prototype weapon ship armed with experimental plasma cannons capable of obliterating entire fleets. It had been docked in the shadows of a nearby asteroid field, hidden from the humans. Now, it was their only hope. Across the battlefield, the few remaining Draxus forces scrambled to regroup around the Vindicator as it emerged from the asteroid field. Its black, angular frame was a monstrous sight, bristling with weaponry that pulsed with unstable energy. The Galactic Council forces gasped in horror as its massive form loomed over the battlefield like a waking nightmare. Commander Varlas, watching from his crippled cruiser, felt a chill run down his spine. "What in the stars is that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. On the human flagship, Admiral Grant's expression didn't waver. His calm demeanor remained unshaken as his officers reported the Vindicator's approach. "Admiral, we're detecting unprecedented energy signatures," said the tactical officer. "Its main weapon could rival planetary defense cannons. They're rallying around it for a counterattack." Grant folded his arms, his gaze fixed on the holographic display. "They're desperate," he said, "and desperation makes them dangerous. Prepare for evasive maneuvers and charge the Aegis's shields. Let's see what they're capable of." The Vindicator fired its first shot, a blinding beam of plasma that ripped through space, aimed directly at the heart of the human fleet. The shot struck a human destroyer, and for the first time in the battle, a Terran ship exploded in a shower of fire and debris. Aboard the Draxus flagship, Keltrak's lips curled into a snarl of satisfaction. Finally, they bleed. But the humans weren't panicked. On the contrary, their response was calculated and immediate. The Terran fleet shifted formation, their ships moving with coordinated precision to spread out and minimize further damage. Admiral Grant's voice was steady. Engage countermeasures. We'll draw their fire and expose their weakness. The humans launched an array of smaller drones, each emitting an electromagnetic interference field. The drones darted toward the Vindicator, disrupting its targeting systems. The Draxus ship fired again, but its plasma beam veered off course, narrowly missing another Terran vessel. Inside the Vindicator, chaos erupted. Engineers scrambled to recalibrate the targeting systems, but the human drones moved too quickly, their interference relentless. Focus fire on those drones. Keltrak ordered through gritted teeth. His officers struggled to obey, but the humans had already anticipated the move. The TSS Aegis made its move. While the rest of the fleet distracted the Vindicator, the Aegis advanced silently, its hull absorbing the energy of stray plasma shots. It closed the distance with chilling precision, moving directly into the Vindicator's blind spot. "Admiral, we're in position," reported the Aegis's captain. Grant's voice came through the comms. "Initiate the precision strike protocol." The Aegis unleashed a focused energy lance, aimed directly at the Vindicator's power core. The beam cut through the prototype ship's armor like a hot knife through butter. Inside the Vindicator, alarms blared as the core began to destabilize. Keltrak's triumph turned to horror. "What's happening?" "Report," an engineer shouted. "They've pierced the core. It's destabilizing. We can't contain it." On board the Draxus flagship, Keltrak watched in stunned silence as the Vindicator's systems failed one by one. The once mighty prototype ship shuddered, its hull splitting apart as the unstable plasma core erupted in a catastrophic explosion. The blast lit up the battlefield, sending shockwaves rippling through the wreckage of the Draxus fleet. The human ships held firm, their shields absorbing the shockwave. For the Draxus, it was the final blow. The remaining ships scattered, their crews abandoning all hope of victory. As the battlefield fell silent, Admiral Grant's voice echoed across all frequencies once more. "This is your last chance. Surrender, or there will be no survivors." The tone was not angry or vengeful. It was a simple statement of fact. The humans had shown their strength, and now they offered mercy. It was a choice the Draxus could no longer ignore. Aboard the Draxus flagship, Keltrak's pride warred with his survival instincts. His claws trembled as he stared at the devastation on the display. The Draxus Dominion had faced defeat before, but never like this. Never so utterly. Slowly, painfully, he lowered his head. "Open a channel," he said, his voice barely audible. The comm officer hesitated but obeyed. Keltrak's voice, once booming with arrogance, now carried the weight of humiliation. "This is High Commander Keltrak of the Draxus Dominion. We surrender." The war was over, but for the Draxus, the defeat would be a wound they would never forget. Humanity had arrived, and they had rewritten the rules of war. Humanity's stern warning. The silence that followed High Commander Keltrak's surrender rippled through the galaxy. Across the battlefield, the remaining Draxus forces powered down their weapons and shields, their ships drifting helplessly. What once was a display of supreme dominance by the Draxus Dominion now lay shattered before the might of humanity. On the TSS Aegis, Admiral Grant stood firm, his eyes locked on the holographic map. The once vibrant swarm of Draxus markers had dimmed, leaving only faint signals of surrendering ships. Yet his expression was not one of victory, it was one of resolve. "Open a galactic channel," Grant ordered, his voice calm but commanding. The communications officer complied, linking every active channel within range, ensuring that not just the Draxus but every watching species could hear what was about to be said. The galaxy had been silent witnesses to this unprecedented battle. Now it was time for them to hear humanity's voice. Grant stepped forward, his image projected across the galaxy. His presence was commanding, his tone firm but measured. "This is Admiral Grant of the Terran Federation. Today, humanity answers the call not as conquerors, but as defenders of justice. Let this serve as a warning to any who seek to dominate through fear and oppression. Keltrak, still slumped in his command chair, listened with a bitter mix of rage and shame. The Draxis Dominion, unchallenged for centuries, had been humbled. And now, the humans spoke as though they owned the battlefield, as though they were more than a species the Draxis once dismissed as primitives. On the bridge of a Galactic Council ship, Commander Varlas leaned forward, hanging on every word. Humanity wasn't boasting. They weren't reveling in their victory. They were delivering a message that could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. Grant continued, his voice unwavering. For decades, humanity observed the galaxy from the shadows, learning, growing, preparing. We do not seek war, but if war comes to us, know this: humanity will not be broken. The message wasn't just for the Draxis, it was for everyone. Every empire, every council, every species that had ever underestimated Earth. It was a declaration, not of conquest, but of resilience. On the Draxis flagship, Keltrak's pride flared one last time. He rose from his seat, clawed hands trembling with fury. "You think this changes anything?" He snarled at the human transmission. "The Draxis will rebuild. We will come back stronger, and when we do." Before he could finish, the human transmission shifted. The view changed to the heart of the battlefield, where the TSS Aegis hovered silently among the wreckage. Its sleek, black hull was a stark contrast to the destruction it had caused. The ship radiated power, not chaotic or destructive, but controlled, precise, and terrifyingly efficient. Admiral Grant's voice cut through Keltrak's rant, calm yet filled with an edge that sent shivers through the Draxis crew. "You had your chance to lead with honor, Keltrak. Instead, you chose tyranny. And now, the galaxy has seen what happens when tyrants push too far." Keltrak froze. The weight of the words was inescapable. They weren't just aimed at him. They were aimed at every ruler, every warlord, every dictator who believed they could rule through fear. Humanity was no longer a shadow in the galaxy. They were a force to be reckoned with. As the message ended, the Terran fleet began to move. They didn't loot or pillage. They didn't linger to gloat. Instead, they methodically dismantled the remaining Draxis weapon systems, ensuring the Dominion would be powerless to strike again. Aboard the Galactic Council ships, Varlas turned to his crew, awe still etched on his face. This changes everything," he said. "The galaxy will never see humans the same way again." His officers nodded. The Draxis, once a symbol of invincibility, had been defeated. But it wasn't just the defeat that left an impression. It was the way humanity had won. They hadn't relied on brute force. They had relied on strategy, precision, and their refusal to tolerate oppression. Back on the Draxis flagship, Keltrak stood alone on his bridge. His officers avoided his gaze, their shame palpable. For centuries, the Draxis Dominion had ruled with an iron fist, their might unchallenged. Now, in a single battle, humanity had undone them. Keltrak's claws dug into the console as he stared at the remains of his fleet. He had underestimated the humans, and now his empire would pay the price. "This isn't over," he whispered to himself, but even he didn't believe the words. The human fleet prepared to leave. Their point made. As the ships began to retreat, Admiral Grant sent one final transmission. "We leave you alive as a testament to the galaxy. No species is beyond redemption, but neither is any species beyond accountability. Remember this day, and choose your next actions wisely." The transmission ended, leaving the Draxis in silence. The humans had come, they had fought, and they had conquered, not for territory or glory, but to send a message. It was a warning to tyrants and a promise to those who had been oppressed. Humanity was no longer a silent observer. As the Terran fleet disappeared into the void, the galaxy was left with a question that would echo for years to come. What else is humanity capable of? Aftermath and reflection. The battlefield was quiet now, save for the drifting remnants of the Draxis fleet. Ships that had once symbolized galactic terror floated lifelessly, a stark reminder of the cost of arrogance. The Draxis dominion had fallen, not just in battle but in reputation. Their defeat wasn't just a military loss, it was a shattering blow to their myth of invincibility. Aboard the Galactic Council cruiser, Commander Varlas stood at the observation window, watching the Terran fleet vanish into the darkness of hyperspace. "They came like a storm," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Silent, devastating, and impossible to ignore. Behind him, his officers began to speak in hushed tones, their awe transforming into a realization. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for too long. Across the galaxy, the news of the battle spread like wildfire. Holographic broadcasts replayed the destruction of the Draxis fleet, the mysterious power of the Terran ships, and Admiral Grant's calm, cutting words. Species from every corner of the galaxy watched in disbelief as the story unfolded. On planets under Draxis control, whispers of rebellion began to stir. The invincible empire had been broken. If humanity could stand against them, perhaps others could too. On neutral worlds, scholars and strategists pored over the footage, dissecting every detail of the battle. The precision, the technology, the discipline, it was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. The question on everyone's mind was the same. How long has humanity been preparing for this? Meanwhile, on Draxis Prime, the heart of the Dominion, the reaction was anything but subtle. The Imperial Council, once filled with pomp and arrogance, descended into chaos. "They humiliated us," one counselor shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "The galaxy will never respect us again." Another counselor, more cautious, leaned forward. "Respect. The galaxy fears them now. They didn't just defeat our fleet, they dismantled it." This wasn't a battle, it was a lesson. High Commander Keltrek, summoned back to the capital in disgrace, stood silent as the council argued. His reputation, once a symbol of Draxis' strength, was in tatters. His claws clenched at his sides, but there was no rage left in him, only a hollow understanding of the truth. "Enough," Keltrek said finally, his voice low but commanding. The room fell silent. "We have only ourselves to blame. We called them primitives. We mocked their species. And now, we've paid the price." Back on Earth, humanity's victory was celebrated, but not with parades or speeches. The Terran Federation had no need for such displays. To them, this was not a moment for glory. It was a confirmation of their philosophy. Prepare for peace, but be ready for war. Admiral Grant returned to Earth with quiet dignity, his mission accomplished. His leadership became the subject of admiration and study across the galaxy, but on Earth, he remained humble. When asked by a young officer what the victory meant, he simply said, "It means we can protect what we've built. Nothing more, nothing less." The Galactic Council, once dismissive of humanity, now found themselves reevaluating their stance. Emergency sessions were called to discuss the implications of the battle. Many species, long oppressed by the Draxis, began to look to Earth for leadership. They didn't fight for conquest. Commander Varlas argued in one such session. They fought to protect their principles. That's what makes them dangerous. They don't want to rule, but they refuse to be ruled. The Council voted unanimously to open formal alliances with the Terran Federation. Humanity, once considered an afterthought in galactic politics, now had a seat at the table, and not just any seat. They were seen as protectors, guardians of balance in a galaxy fraught with turmoil. On the fringes of the galaxy, whispers of humanity's victory reached even the most distant worlds. Pirates and warlords began to tread carefully, their fear of the Terran fleet outweighing their lust for power.